Good morning. We were beginning Hilchos Yibbum vChalitzah today. And as soon as we begin, we're going to end quickly also on a day or two. The Rambam begins Perek Aleph with the general rule of what Yibbum is. The case as man and woman get married, and the woman has no children, the man has no children, and he dies. So the law is that the brother of the husband, who ordinarily would be forbidden to marry her, really is required according to law to marry her. And then there's Chalitzah, but we're not learning about Chalitzah today. We're going to talk about Yibbum. Now, Yibbum is a very unique case of marriage. So the Rambam describes mitzvahs esem and atera sheyam odom eishes achiv me'aviv bein min hanisuyin bein min ha'erison im meis beloy zera. That there's a mitzvah to marry the wife of your brother if you died without children. Maamar of Yevamah. And then he continues, a very important point in our discussion. Min ha'Torah, einay tzorech lekadesh yivamtei, shezu ishtei hui shehik l'loy min hashamayim. According to the Torah, you do not need to do any act of kiddush. Generally, a marriage is made up of two parts. There's what's called kiddushin, whereas her become married to a level where they can now go to the second stage and live as man and wife, which is called a life of chaya ishus, a life of marriage. So, but before they go to the stage of a life of marriage, they need to go through a process of acquisition, so to speak, where he gives her in some way, uses a means of acquiring that relationship, and therefore then he can go on and marry her. But you can't just live together in Jewish law. Then really, but by a Yibbum it's totally different. He goes straight to living together. Unique situation in Judaism, as we're going to discuss today. Now, that's the way it is according to the Torah. However, the next chapter, which is the last chapter of today's Rambam, of our learning of today's Rambam, Perek Beis Halacha Aleph. There the Rambam adds a lot. However, Midivrei Seifrim, the rabbis later instituted, now it's an interesting phrase, sort of in a negative way. Don't live together as husband and wife till he actually goes through the process of kiddushin b'fnei shnei edim, the usual process in front of two witnesses, bipruta, with using a financial, the minimal amount of financial requirement, oy b'shava pruta, or even giving her something of value of a pruta. Now, v'zehu hanikra maimer. This is called maimer. An interesting name for it, but that's what it's called. Now, the Rambam immediately puts us on notice. That doesn't really do the trick, because it's only a formality with some obligations, as it's going to explain. Then he goes on to say another thing. Although the rabbis instituted a form of kiddushin, which always has to be with the woman's full consent. So he says, same thing here. Since they instituted a form of marriage that is similar to all marriages, and at that point, the woman has to consent. You can't do it against the woman's will. and then that's as far as relevant to us. Then he goes to one more Allah. Keshem shu mekadesh es yevimte, just like they instituted a process of kiddushin before the living together. So he goes through the brachas, as we know, under a chuppah. We make 7 brachas, and you need ba'asara, you need 10 people, and he adds another condition, v'koisiv ksuba, and he writes his own ksuba, kedin kol neis isha, like anybody who marries a woman. And then he goes to the final Allah. However, let's say he skipped this rabbinic kiddushin, and he goes straight to living together. So he gets beaten up by the courts, but he still writes Riksuba. And then he goes back and tells us in Halachic Gimel that you need the consent of the woman in this case is only on the kiddushin part. However, one who skips the kiddushin part, it doesn't matter whether he intended, she intended, if they live together and they have relations, she is his wife totally. Without any intent and not any knowledge, doesn't matter. The act itself of living together creates the marriage, the full marriage. Now, if anybody looking at this, the way the Rambam postures these halachas, it should really arouse many, many questions in your mind. Question number 1. He spoke about, right in the beginning, he tells us, you've got to, this is what your Yibbum is about. You live together. You don't have to acquire no act of kiddushin because God gave her to you. It's a woman that has already been destined to you through God. There is some kind of a relationship before you actually live together. In other words, kiddushin is made to create a relationship. That relationship has been created by God. If that's the case, normally you would assume that the Rambam would immediately tell you, however, the rabbis instituted the Divrei Seifrim that you need to do kiddushin. You do need to do kiddushin. Why did he wait till the end of the next period to do that? Second, and he wrote that don't do it because God gave it to you. So he should have said, yeah, but the Divrei Seifrim, the Chachamim said, don't do it. You need to do kiddushin. Now, the halacha of that a relationship that takes place between a husband, between a yavam and the Yevamah is valid even if it's non-intentional on either side. Why does he wait till the second chapter, the second paragraph, to talk about it? He should have said it right away in the beginning, because that's where he's focused on. That's the way it happens. He should have said it. And you should know this halach. He waits till he tells you about this idea of kiddushin. Then he tells you, is good. He writes it in a negative way. Don't live with her. Don't have relations with her till you do kiddushin. Now, the Gemara says it differently. Gemara says, mitzvahs Yevamah mekadesh v'achar do kiddushin and then live together. So why did the Rambam focus on the negative instead of the positive, the way it's written in the Gemara? That and you can't say that he's trying to tell you that you can get married without it, because he says it right afterwards. He doesn't have to hint at it. Now, He writes, I'm going to skip another part over here, which I don't want because of time. He writes, just like he does Kedushin, this new institution created by the Chachamim, so too he makes Birchas Nisuyim. Kedin, and writes a Ksuba, Kedin kol nois isha, like anybody. Doesn't bring any source for this. And everybody struggles. Where is the source of this halacha from the Rambam? Now, in addition, when the Rambam writes Kashem Shahu Kach, there seems to be that one leads to the other. Okay, what does one lead to the other over here? How does one have anything to do dafka to the other? What does he write about Ksuba here? He's talking. It also seems to be a result of just like they instituted this, they instituted that. Why does one have to do the other? They instituted that they should do an act of kedushin because you shouldn't marry her, you shouldn't live with her without it. What's this about? Now he writes in Hilchas Ishus when he talks about marriage, which we just finished learning. He writes, "Ires v'kones l'chuppah v'loi birach berchas chasanim areizin esua gemura v'chayzer mevarach afil achakamiya." In a regular marriage, if a person does the erison and does chuppah, and but forgets to do birchas chasanim, doesn't do the brachas, good, but go back and do the brachas. Here, it's not clear. The Rambam doesn't say what to do. It just says if you skip this case, okay, she's married, good. Now, he gets his lashes for doing it that way, but that's it. Now, there are those who say, because it was so simple that the Rambam didn't have to say it, but that's hard to say. The Rambam, what we'll see soon, the Rambam does not say it. It's obvious the Rambam does not hold it so simply compared to a regular marriage. Now, the Rambam changes the words from what he usually calls birchas chasanim in other places, and he calls it here birchas nisuyim. So there are those who say, as I said, that the reason it's not mentioned because it was they said that she's like a regular woman. However, the Rambam does not at all claim that she makes at any place that there is a birchas erusin. As we know, under a chuppah there are two sets of brachas. There's the bracha before they give the ring and the bracha afterwards, and they did not make a bracha before they give the ring. But why not? It was like a regular woman. Why is there no chuppah? Like a regular woman. Obviously, the Rambam does not hold that she's like a regular woman. Okay. There's another issue just to mention that, and this is an important issue. When he speaks about what the Divrei Seifrim, what the Chachamim instituted, they instituted that you should do it, give her a pruta in front of two eidim. However, when it comes to the actual living together in a regular marriage, that also has to be in front of eidim. Not they live together, they have to seclude in front of eidim, that they were able to live together. Nowhere does the Rambam mention you need eidim on that. And the Mishnah Lamelech Takit is mistapik. He has a suffix whether they need. And those who say clearly they do need. The Ramah says you need eidim and you need chuppah and you need kedusha, everything, just like any woman. And he adds only you need eidim. But the Rambam leaves it out. Leaves out chuppah, leaves out eidim. Why? Okay, so it's obvious something is here in the Rambam that needs to be explained. To explain this, I want to first mention a very important sikha of the Rebbe in Chelik Lamed Tes, Parshas Kiseitze, which I believe when we learned Kedushin, it like to me was the guide to understanding Kedushin. And I think the Rebbe here literally illuminates marriage in a way that I have never seen anything like it. It gives a perspective that is incredible and really, really is very helpful in understanding many halachas. Now, we learned Kedushin a number of years ago in yeshiva, and it was like over and over that idea of the Rebbe's explanation really helped in getting to the bottom of understanding what's going on over there. And the Rebbe bases his issue on a Rambam in Hilchos Ishus, the beginning of Hilchos Ishus, a very famous Rambam, where the Rambam, who is not generally known that in the Sefer Yad HaChazaka, in the Rambam, he writes history, for some reason begins Hilchos Ishus in a historic context, and starts off telling us that before Matan Torah, a woman did not need anything else, but a man and a woman got together. They decided we're going to get married, and we're going to live together. And that's it. They lived together and they were married. And then he says, after Matan Torah, we came along, the Torah came along and said, no, you cannot live together. In order to live together, you got to first go through this process of kiddushin, of marriage, of a ceremony of where the two become connected. There's an acquisition of the husband for the wife, and the wife consents to that acquisition, and it goes through a process, and then they can live together. And one is the first part is called Erison, then they live together, is called Nisuy. And the Rebbe brings out a unbelievable, beautiful concept. And basically the question is, why is the Rambam telling you the history? Who cares? Why do we need to know what happened before? The main thing is what to do today, not what happened before. So the Rebbe explains that the Rambam is teaching us that marriage only changed after Matan Torah in one aspect. In Erison, we added to the old form of marriage a new point, which is you must first acquire the woman through a process of Erison. They have to have that relationship first, and then you go on and you can live together like you did before. Then you go back to the age-old way of before Matan Torah, before the Torah was given, and they lived together as husband and wife, and that didn't change. Yes, there are different nuances that were added, chuppah, and different points that come along with it, and but that's all of the influence of this new idea of Erison. So there is some influences of Erison on chuppah, on Nisuyim, but basically Nisuyim is no different than was before. That is, it's an incredible understanding of marriage, and an incredible understanding of the Rambam. It's just like otherwise the Rambam is very hard to understand. Okay, having said that, now let's transfer to Yibbum. And here is where I believe the Rebbe's approach there will illuminate our issue here. Suddenly comes the Torah and says, I have for you a marriage where all you got to do is live together. Let's stop and think. What's the Torah telling us? Torah is basically telling us this marriage is back to the old way. You don't need anything. Just get married. Just live together. And the Rambam explains, you know why? There is such a concept of being first connected through a process of Erison, and then that God took care of that. He connected you. The Eibishter connected you. So as far as the living together as husband and wife, by Yibbum, what the Torah is telling you, just go ahead and live together. No, I'm not adding anything here. Just live together. You're back to the old way. Nothing new here. Don't do anything. That's the case. It makes sense. No Eidim, no Chuppah, nothing. It's just living together. Didn't need Eidim before Matan Torah. Why we need now? Okay. Now that's why Perek Aleph doesn't mention anything about Maamar, about Kinyan, because they're establishing what is Yibbum. Yibbum has nothing to do with us doing anything. It's just living together. So it's back to the grind, to the old way. It's not the old way; it's a new way without any of it's the same thing as every Nisuyin, except without any input from heirs. Now the Chachamim came along, Perek Beis, and said, "But we won't like this idea. I don't say like this idea. We don't want only to go straight to living together, even though it's okay, even though it's the right thing, and the Torah told you that. We would like to add another precondition, but the Rambam says it's not a precondition to living together, a precondition that don't, in a negative way. We don't want, or based on our needs, based on the level of holiness, based on whatever you want to say, we would like to institute the idea that do have some form of erison before you actually, so that you don't live together without some kind of act of erison. Similar to, let's go back to the erison of the Torah, of a regular woman. A regular woman can become an arusa through living together too, through having relations. But the Rabbanan, they forbade that. They said, no, first do the other stuff. Kesef, shtar, then you can do this. And I don't want to get into the details what they were getting. Similar idea. We don't want you going straight here. And therefore they made Makas Mardas, they gave Makas Malkus if he did it. We want you to go through a process to go here. But that's it. It's not the old regular erison. But it's an erison only in the sense of don't jump to Bia. Don't jump to living together. And that's why the Rambam stresses the negative, as we asked before. Okay, if that's the case, the Rambam doesn't have Eidim by this Bia, because this Bia is not the Matan Torah Bia. Why we're not adding anything. The Chachamim just came along and said, "I don't want you living together without a process." But that's it. It's not that they recreated the old erison. However, and therefore no chuppah. This is not. There's no chuppah before Matan Torah. Now, again, why he waited a whole period for this is because he established first that this is not the same as a regular woman. Otherwise, you would confuse it. No, a whole period of only Bia. Now he adds there is one little nuance. Don't live together as husband and wife. Don't have physical relationship until you do this. So, and I guess it's only in a negative way to avoid the negative, not because this is the process. That's why he doesn't use the Lashon HaGemara. Okay, now, yet, there are two things that Rambam does borrow, so to speak, that the Chachamim did, I don't know whether would borrow, but did institute from a regular marriage. And what are those two things? Birchas Nisuyin and Ksub. Why those two things? Because both of those two things have to do with living together. What is that? The Mishnah Masechta Kala says, Kala b'loy bracha, Asura lebayla kenida. It's not just that without birchas nisuin, it's like she is still impure. You can't live with her. Ksuba, we say that you cannot live with a woman. If a person loses ksuba, he cannot live with his wife. Ksuba is relevant, and we spoke in the last year that it's relevant to the life of a husband and wife. So that's the kashem. That's why he says, just like one of the instituted, don't live with her until you do a process. We don't want you doing anything that living with her until the process that's relevant to the living with her. So this is part of giving a heter bia. And that's the kashem shemekadish. So too you need to make brachas, and so too you need to give ksuba. And being that the case, if a person jumped the gun and he did the bia, so there's no birchas nisuin now. Not like a regular woman who's required to have brachas, because there the brachas also help in the overall. Here it's only to allow you to have bia. You had it already. Bye. We don't need the brachas now. Except we require that they should give a ksuba still. That much, yes, because ksuba is not only relevant to the immediate, it's relevant to the whole life, I guess, like we spoke last week. That's why you don't make birchas eres. That's not that why. Let's think for a second. Why don't you make birchas eres? Perhaps this is just a thought that birchas eres, one of the things we say is that the marriage sanctifies Jewish people by bringing out the fact that we are not allowed to marry those who are arayos to us, those who are under the prohibition of marriage. But Yibbum allows us to marry somebody who's prohibited to us, because a wife of a brother is generally prohibited, and here suddenly it becomes mutter. So perhaps that's why you can't make the bracha. Same thing as you can't say the bracha b'chuppah kedushin. There's no chuppah. So it would fit. That would answer why we don't do that. But either way, I believe it fits very well into the Rambam based on this yisaid that the bia of Yevamah is the bia kaid matan Torah. The takon of Maamar is not regular erison, it's shaloi yavayaleh. It's because of that. It's similar to the takana that we don't allow a mekadosh rabia. We don't let somebody get mekadosh rabia. That's this concept. So in order not to be a mekadosh rabia, and not to go straight to bia, that's what we allow. So anything that is relevant to the heter bia, they were misakin as part of kedushin. Chuppah is part of bia. It's part of yichud, therefore not relevant, because this is matan Torah bia. I think it works well with the Rambam's lashon. Anyway, have to be well, and sei gesund und stark. Tzlocha Rabba.